gotta say, I am loving the intro music and the graphics that they're doing for these panels. So, well done, pretty fun.
They have a good time for sure.
Absolutely. And so I hope we all will have a good time here. Welcome everyone to the literary guest of honor Q&A. It's Friday night of LibertyCon. I hope to see some regulars in the virtual audience, and hopefully some new people who are getting a chance to test out LibertyCon because we're virtual again this year. And actually, I guess this is the first time we're virtual in some events around this full blown virtual convention. Welcome, Patty Briggs. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Toni Weisskopf, and I'm publisher of Baen Books. I have to say, I wish we published Patty, but we don't. I am here at this panel, standing in for all of the readers. Before I ever became a filthy pro, I was a reader of science fiction and fantasy, and I still read science fiction and fantasy for fun. So I was able to have the honor of interviewing Patty. I will say that if you're over on the Discord server and you have questions, we'll be happy to entertain those too. Hopefully this will be fairly free flowing. I do have some questions to start Patty off. I have already been introduced to the dragon, whose name is Edgar. Hey there, Edgar. And I will warn everybody that Smokey, my cat, may make an appearance. And also to say that if I do fling him out of the screen, that he's perfectly fine. He does land on his feet. So, having having made the standard virtual caveats and introductions, we will get things rolling here. I know that we have a lot of writers and young writers, new writers who attend LibertyCon. So we're going to talk a little bit about writing. So my first question for you is, were you always a writer? Was that your ambition to be a New York Times #1 best-selling author?
I would never have had that as an ambition. It would feel too much. I'm a very practical person. I always told stories, and I think I would say through like elementary into high school, what I did most often was draw, and I drew pictures, and then I would have to, and then people go, well, who is that? And then I would go, it's a fantasy drawing. Can you see like the unicorn horn? And then I would have to tell a story about it to make the artwork. And as it turned out, I do better at that than I do at artwork. I can draw horses, I can draw women, I can draw long medieval style dresses on women. If I have to draw legs, I'm out. Which is probably why I can't draw men. I guess if I drew men in long medieval style clothing, then that would probably work okay too. And I can do some dogs, not all of them. But nobody would pay me to draw anything. My sister was the storyteller. I have a sister who's 4 years older than I am, and she's the one who introduced me to fantasy and to reading and to storytelling. And she's now a doctor, actually. She's an MD and a PhD. I'm the stupid one, right?
I feel you. I'm the underachiever in my family. I'm the only one who doesn't have an advanced degree. But I figure someday Oxford will convey me that honorary degree.
I don't know, editor at Baen. That doesn't seem to me like you need an advanced degree. That's pretty highfalutin. That's pretty cool.
But I'm not a doctor. So.
All right. Well,
I'm going to guess your sister is probably not a #1 New York Times bestseller.
No, she's not. No, she's not. Yet, if she ever decides to publish some of her books that she's written, maybe. But
good.
She's too busy. So, especially this last year.
Yeah, send her my way.
So
what part of the country did you grow up in?
I grew up in Montana. I was born and raised in Butte, Montana, which is an old mining town. And it used to be like 1920s. There were maybe 120,000 people. And when I grew up there were 40, and I think there's like 30 now. So although it's growing again, they have about the time I left it the second time. So, mid like 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. Some high-tech companies moved in, and so they've got kind of a second renaissance, and they're starting to grow. 9 months of winter, 40 below, usually for a week, 20 below zero on either side of it. And then summer was really hot, and then it went winter again. And we had, I've seen snowstorms in Montana, in Butte, I've seen snowstorms every month of the year except for August. And I told a friend of mine that, and she said last year it snowed in August.
So why did you ever leave this paradise?
I know, right? Oh, I love Montana, but you can't eat the scenery. It is beautiful. It has beautiful mountains. It has extremely beautiful rivers. It has great people. I really like them. But it's hard to earn a living there. And so my husband got an opportunity, first to go work at the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago as an aquarist. And right? We have adventure. I told you, I think I told you earlier, I play it safe. I'm practical. My husband was the dreamer, and he would say, hey, why aim higher? And that's how I got published, is that he said, you finish the book, you got to send it out. I'm like, okay, but I always was a reader, is what I was. I had books, and my mother was a librarian, and I'd go to school, and high school, I'd have 4 or 5 paperbacks in my purse, and just, I read really fast, and sometimes I felt like reading a scene from an old book that I had read before. I didn't know what I wanted to read during the day, and I would read during class and listen to the lectures at the same time. And I had an ongoing joke with one of my chemistry professors who would call on me, and I'd answer the question without looking up from my book that I was reading. And
nice.
He found it funny, which was lucky. So, yeah. No, I was always a reader. And in fact, now I would say I'm a reader first and a writer second.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
So,
yeah. Well,
I read a lot of books.
Oh, so. Wow. Yeah. Ah, well, that sounds like I need to hit you up for a quote after this, but yes.
All right.
Or two. That sounds great. There are a lot of writers who are readers too. David Weber is a big reader of the genre and loves the genre. A lot of writers find it difficult to read in genre while they're writing in genre.
I think the first 2 or 3 books I wrote, in fact, my very first book, when Ace brought it back out, because it had been out of print since the 2,000 copies that got printed and my mother bought, were sold at the end of the first year that it was out. And then they brought it back out about, 10 or 15 years later, and I revised it. And I can tell you which author I was reading for which chapter as I went back to revise. I'm going, oh, well. And it was all in phrases, but I'm like, okay, but I'm better now. I don't do that. What I find is that if I'm having a tough time writing, what I really need to do is grab a good book and read it. And it's not so much that I don't take anything from that. It's just like the creative energies. It fills up my creative well, and it makes me excited about telling stories. When I read a really good book, the first thing I want to do is sit down and write something. And I do read out of genre. I read romances. I read thrillers. I read anything with a horse in it. I read, I don't know, horror. Not as much horror, but I read a lot of westerns. I read, whatever comes to mind. Anytime it's a really good storyteller, I like that.
Now, you're best known for your urban fantasies.
Yes.
And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I'm curious, since you are such a wide reader, give me your favorite writer, Western, horror, romance.
Favorite writer, Western, is Louis L'Amour.
Not all three together. Yeah. Okay.
Not all. Yeah. Louis L'Amour. And actually, he'd count for romance too. Favorite writer, romance. Boy, that changes. And I'm going to take paranormal romance out of it because it's a little too close to my own genre. And if I do that, maybe Jan Ann Krentz, who has written under Jane Castle and Amanda Quick, which is, I'm sure, tongue-in-cheek. She does the best dialogue in the business. Favorite mystery, Dick Francis. And favorite horror. Oh, that's harder. I love Robert McCameron's books. He did the I know it's a werewolf book, The Wolf's Hour, I think is what it's called. I just love that book. Stephen King, boy, he's such a good storyteller. I don't always like I'm not always interested in the story he chooses to tell, but if I sit down with the book, I can't put it down. He's really a good storyteller. If you know, and you could maybe slip Laurel K. Hamilton, some of her work, you could probably slip her Guilty Pleasure probably fit very nicely into horror, even though they published it as fantasy, and that was the right thing to do, and it created a whole new market by doing that. That first book, if I go back, when I went back and read it again after about 3 or 4 years of not reading it, you can really see that it fit very nicely with horror rather than with fantasy. It was pretty grim.
Yep.
Wonderful book. Pretty grim.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You asked me favorite authors. I could keep going.
No, I see that. That's great. That's great. We may come back to that. You mentioned growing up in Montana. Did you grow up with horses then? Were
I was
you a horse person early?
I was horse crazy from the time I can remember. My dad used to say when I was 3 or 4, I'd make them pull over the side on the highway and make them go over and let me pet horses. And he actually grew up on a ranch, but my folks lived in town with no horses, and I campaigned. I had to take tap dancing lessons in order to get to ride horses. So my mom said I could take tap dancing lessons. If I took dancing lessons, then I could take horseback riding lessons too. And so I did that. I was a terrible dancer. I have 4 left feet. I still have 4 left feet. I'm a terrible dancer. First she put me in ballet, and that was just really, really too awful for words. I was, 10 years old and 5'4", and a little pudgy, and it just was. Awful.
Not your
Tap dancing was better. Yeah. Tap dancing was better. And after 2 years, she let me quit, which is awesome. And the horses, I've never quit. I didn't own my first horse, though, until I was, like 21 or 22. My brother bought me one. So, right?
Wow. And awesome. You were literally in a horse trailer now.
I'm literally in a horse trailer now. Behind me is a towel covering up the window. This is a wonderful RV that belongs to a friend of mine, and they're all sweltering out in the hot, so I can do this.
Well, we will thank them.
Yes.
So, are you at a horse show now?
I am. It's a Region 4 Arabian Championships here in Nampa, Idaho, and I don't actually have a horse I own in here, but my friends whose trailer I'm sitting in, they bought a horse from me, and that. I didn't. Well, okay. I bought his mother with that baby already coming, so I didn't really breed him. But I held him the first day when he stood up, and I named him. And Snapdragon is his name. He does like to bite people, so I think that probably wasn't the best choice of name. But it does sound cute coming over the loudspeaker, and he's a really fantastic horse. And his owner is a friend of mine who's this is more than you want to know, but she's probably the prettiest rider I have ever seen in my life. Just absolutely beautiful. So it's a privilege to watch them grow up together.
That is cool. No. It really is. I mean, we're so most of us are so divorced from horses and riding and
land
and the land and
So it's. I find that the horses and the riding work really well together. If I just did riding, I'd weigh 500 pounds and sit in a dark corner the rest of my life. But since I have horses, every day I have to get up and I go and I feed the horses and I look and make sure nobody's got owies. And I have a total of about 30 horses at this point because I breed Arabians. Ooh. And I have the old guys, the horses that have given their useful life to you. You got to take care of those guys. And then we have the show horses, the ones people ride. And then I have the brood mares, and then I have the babies. And after a while, there just gets to be a lot of them. So I get up and feed horses every day, and then I come back and I write, and then at night I have to go feed the horses. So I have to get out and I have to engage in life, and I have to work, and I have to, lift hay and do all of those wonderful things because I would never go to. If I had a gym membership, I would never use it. But the horses, they're there all the time, and if you don't go out and feed them, they don't eat. So you go out and you do the job. And I find it's a really nice balance for the riding. And it gives me, when I can't ride, I get out and I go ride for a while. And I come back and I can get it done. So it's fun that I can.
No, that is cool. I was going to ask you whether you, since canines play such a big part in your book, if you were a dog person or a cat person, but you're a
I am too. Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. I have right now. I have 2 cats, a dog. Although I'm trying to adopt another dog, and like I said, about 30 horses. And the dog is worth about 5. He's a rescue German Shepherd cross, and he came to me pretty. I mean, just he was well treated all the way around, but when you move those big shepherds around, they get traumatized. They're 1-person dogs, and when they move around, it's hard on them. And then right after we got him, he was my husband's dog, and he was just settling in, and my husband passed away. So then he had more trauma again, the poor thing, and us too. So, but he's awesome, and I love my cats. I've had cats since I was a kid. I think I was in a green room with about 4 authors, and one of them was Tamara Pierce, who's a rescue, who does cat rescue, and the other one, I think Tanya Huff might have been in that bunch too. But I think we averaged out something like 10 cats a piece, even though the rest of us only had 2 or 3. Because
So on average, you're all crazy cat ladies. Yeah.
Right. My husband used to say the only difference between crazy horse lady and a crazy cat lady is that you need more land for the big crazy horse lady.
Right. Okay. Good. And you have it all covered.
Yes.
And so obviously, that comes through in your writing. Not the crazy cat lady part, but the familiarity, and the love of animals.
Yeah. And I don't get everything right, but I will say that I try to do my research, and I get it right enough. There are things that when you go from the all dogs are this way, all cats are this way, and you can go to the specific, my cat does this, then I get that part right. My cat is like this, my horse is like this, my dog is like that. That part I get right, and I don't bother about the all German Shepherds are this way, and that's something that's above my grade. That's above my pay grade.
So. Yeah, I inherited my mom's German Shepherd when she passed away, and he was the stupidest German Shepherd you have ever met. I mean, most of them are really smart, but he was an idiot.
My dog is so. I was away at I was at a convention, I think, and my friend, my poor Sparky, who got introduced to horses when she started working for me, she takes care of my place while I'm gone. And the neighbor's cows got in to my place, and they were eating the hay. So she went out to try to do something about it. My dog went out there, drove all of those cattle off of my land away from her, right? All by himself that dog is smarter than I am. He's cool. He's really cool.
And so far as we know, no previous herding experience on his resume.
Yeah. Actually, I can tell you no, because I actually know his whole life story. They found him as a puppy by the side of the road, and then he was adopted to a wonderful lady who had a Shih Tzu, and the Shih Tzu did not like they're very protective of their owners, and he did not like the other dog, and she was afraid that as Mouse, my dog's name is Mouse, named after Harry Dresden's dog. Yeah. So anyway.
Nice. Yeah. No, big dog, little dog, sometimes that works. I mean, sometimes it really doesn't. Yeah.
Well, my dog would not have worked anyway. I think she was in an apartment, and that's just not a thing. He runs probably 15 miles a day. So
yeah. My idiot German Shepherd, he was definitely an inside dog. He liked to be inside, didn't like to go running around.
That's really weird for a shepherd.
Oh,
really
he was a weird freaking dog. He was. But all right, we're not going to talk about.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about these dogs. We can talk about fantasy dogs. So, why werewolves?
Well, at the time, everybody was doing vampires, and werewolves were sidelight. So part of it was to be a little bit different, but part of it is I've always loved the werewolf genre. I used to read a wonderful Marvel comic book called Werewolf by Night. And it was really well done. The storyline was really good. And my favorite thing that they did in that was they went from having the werewolf as a horrific figure, so when he turned a werewolf, he went out and killed his friends and created mayhem and all that stuff, to where the werewolf was a heroic figure. So he couldn't quite direct it, but he could make sure that the werewolf treated his friends right and that did the right thing. And that was kind of almost like a Incredible Hulk kind of story, you know?
Yeah.
And I just loved that. The fact that this big, scary creature was not the bad guy. And that was fun. And I love wolves. I have always loved wolves. I think they are the sexiest creature in the wild. Okay, that and the big cats. I just think they're cool. I love the way that when you look a wolf in the eye, you know your prey. My sister-in-law, when Mike and I were first married, my sister-in-law had a 15th, 16th wolf, and the other 16th was Malamute. And she got him because he came out looking like a Malamute. He was black and tan. And so the breeder gave him to her brother for free, and her brother gave the dog to her, the wolf to her for Christmas without talking to his parents, and that's how she ended up with a wolf. But they did everything right. He was really well behaved, but it was fun. He'd be lying down in the house, and strangers would come in, and we'd all gather and talk and be fine. And then Shadow would move, and the stranger would stiffen like this and go, "What is that? That's not a dog." And I mean, people who've never seen a wolf before would do that. It was really a cool effect. And I learned a lot about wolf behaviors because of Shadow, but also because I did a lot of studying on it. And I feel very privileged to live in a world where there are critters like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, wolves are fascinating, and your understanding of wolves, absolutely comes through in the books. So very early on in my editorial career, one of the ways that Jim Bain nurtured new editors was to throw anthologies at them. So I got to do 2 anthologies with a pal of mine, Greg Cox. Tomorrow Bites and Tomorrow Sucks.
I remember
The
those.
first,
I remember
the,
those.
do you remember that? Yeah, yeah, no, they're
Yes.
absolutely fun to put together. And the first one was about vampires, but we noticed that where vampires came, so came also wolves,
Yeah.
and werewolves. So
Well,
it was nice for me to see the werewolves come first, in your
thank
work.
you. Yeah, I just connect with them better. I think vampires are scarier to me. Werewolves have I guess, a motivation I can understand. I understand anger. I understand rage. I'm not myself very often an angry person, but I know where that comes from. Vampires, I don't understand somebody who is willing to sacrifice other people in order to live, right? Which is
Mhm.
kind of where the vampires are. I mean, everybody has a different take on vampires, and
Right,
that's fine.
right.
And my take is everything I learned as a kid until I hit about 15. That's where vampires are for me. And then I take that and I change things up. But so the three horror monsters that are easiest to use in novels, okay, are the werewolf, the vampire, and the zombie. So Frankenstein, the werewolf, and Dracula, right? And
Right.
the and they all say something different about we humans, and they all contribute to maybe the literary tones of early horror, because they were the people who made those monsters up were trying to say something, and I think that they hit on something very visceral, the idea that you can be consumed with anger or rage and hurt the people around you is a very human thing.
Yep.
The idea that there are people out there that look beautiful and and I know vampires have such a big history behind them, but we'll just do the vampire as the a dangerous lover. Um, the idea that that there are people that feed on other people, that's a very social commentary thing. I love your cat. That's a very social comment to make, and people can resonate with that. And then the idea that you can come back from the dead, and that's both the vampires and the zombies, and what that
Hmm.
means. There's so much power of story behind those 3 creatures. Um, and as a writer, it's really dangerous to make up your own monsters, because either you have to spend page after page describing them and hoping that the reader doesn't just skip over the description, or you don't give them a description at all, and then they don't know what your monster is.
Right.
Right. And both of them are bad. If I say dragon, immediately in your head pops up a dragon, and then I can tell you how the dragon. This is for the writers out there. And then I can tell you how a dragon works. If I say vampire, everybody in reading that knows what a vampire is, and then I only have to change it a little bit. So it just takes me a few sentences, a few words, or just light touches all the way through the book, and that's fine. If I tell you a Gazebelbach, I just grabbed a word, not a word. And nobody has any idea what that is. And so I have to the great science fiction novels, I'm thinking David Feintuch's, oh, come on. I can't think of the name of the series. Do you remember it? Right? I know, right?
Great covers.
But anyway,
great covers. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and they're great books too. And his scary space alien, it was a really freaky, scary space alien. They were goldfish. That's how he described them, as goldfish, because it worked better than trying to. And he did it right. I mean, it's his human people are looking at this monster, and they try to define the monster in terms they understand. But as a writer, it's like, oh my gosh, it's much easier to say goldfish than this giant, glowy, flanky thing with the mouth that,
Right. Right. And I think that's part of the fun of the urban fantasy genre, right? Is taking
Sure.
is taking the trope, and then we get to see what each author's take is on it.
Right.
And that's part of the fun, right? That's as a reader,
Absolutely.
you go into it and you go, okay, werewolf, fine. But what do you do with that werewolf? What do you do with that vampire?
Correct.
And
I go back to I'm trying to I just lost his name. Let me think. His name got misspelled all of the time.
Got to narrow that down.
Editor. Oh shoot. Anyway, it's gone. But one of the things he always said is all stories are about people first. Maybe Bradbury might have said that too. And as long as as a writer, you keep that in mind, then you use that to play with your monsters and your vampires and things. But you have to give people, and vampires can be people just like rabbits. I mean, Watership Down taught us that rabbits could be people too. But people read stories about people. They don't read stories about ideas. They don't. Yeah. Okay, I'm done. Done with that one.
We do have some questions coming in from the audience, and I need Hillbilly to flash them up again because I can't read that fast and also listen to Patty. But one of the questions from the audience was we want Patty's origin story. How did you get your first story published?
So I decided, I had a friend of mine in college who wrote books, and they were good books.
All right, just to make sure you were not bitten by a spider, right?
Okay. No, I was not bitten by a spider. No, okay. Unfortunately, no radioactivity involved. I just had a college buddy of mine who wrote really good books, and this will date me. Her dorm room was filled with 3-ring binders and spiral notebooks that she had written novels by hand on. And we had gotten our first computer, and I just decided one day out of the blue, I think I was a senior in college, I thought, I'm going to write a book. And I decided, went around trying to figure out what exactly I was going to write about. I thought, fantasy. I could spend a couple years writing a fantasy. If I wrote a romance, I'd be interested in it for 3 days. So I wrote the first 10 pages of Masks while I was in college, over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where until the day he died, my husband could quote the first page in total because I made him read it. Oh, look, I took out 3 adjectives. Oh, look, I put 3 adjectives back in. Oh, look, I'm not kidding. It was awful.
He must have loved you very much.
He loved me very much. And then we moved to Chicago, and that was from Montana. And the biggest city in the state at that time, it's much bigger now, but the biggest city at the state at that time was Billings, and I think it was, I can't even tell you how big it was. It was not very big. The Hancock Tower in Chicago, the John Hancock Tower, which is not the tallest, but it's a big building. More people went to work every day in that building than lived in Billings, Montana. So when we moved to Chicago, I was a fish out of water. There were others like me. We got pulled over in downtown Chicago. The car behind us started honking and waving their hands, and we thought something terrible was going on. So we found a little piece to pull over, and we pulled over, and these people ran up and they go, "You're from Bozeman! I'm from Bozeman!" You know, they were so excited. So, you know, it was a wonderful time. It was a great thing, but it was a lot of people, and I would hide in the book. And so that's where I wrote the book. I wrote the book the year we lived in Chicago, and finished it. And Mike said, "You need to send it out." And I said, "Okay." So I sent out the first 10 pages to everybody who published fantasy and science fiction, because I read Orson Scott Card's on writing science fiction and fantasy. And obviously other people had, and editors were very irritated by it, because I got a whole bunch of no's. I got one, I think it was from Del Rey. I got one, don't bother sending me the first 100 pages. Send me the whole manuscript or not. That was in the day when if you send a manuscript out to an editor, you didn't send it to anybody else. You waited until you heard back, right? So that was a workaround for that. So I was polishing it up to get to do that, and editor at Ace wrote to me and said, "Hey, you know, I kind of like this. If you were an author I had dealt with before, I would totally buy this. But how about you, I'm going to give you some things I want you to change and see what you can do with it." And she was spot on, and she was a great editor. And Lauren Gilman was my editor, and she was just a baby editor. She had just started there. Probably otherwise she would never have bought that book, because as I said, it had issues. But she was a really good editor, and she helped me become a much better writer with that. And they eventually bought that book, and it had a cool cover, but it wasn't. It was a cool piece of art. It wasn't probably the best cover for a new author, because it was too detailed. There was too much in it. And then they printed it on orange cardstock and lost all of the fine definitions of it. And so it just didn't pop. And also they printed it in really small font. And so it made it look like I think it was 85,000 words, and it really looked like one of Andre Norton's 40,000 word stories, which is fine. And also it wasn't very good. So the second book I wrote, and the second book was better, and the second book had a royal cover, and there was nothing. The first book was Jean-Pierre Target, and he's a great cover artist. He did a great job. The second one was a royal cover, though, and people buy books because they have royal covers, and the sales were better, and it was a better book. But then Lauren Gilman left and went to work for Rock, which was not part of Ace at that time, which it is now. So my editor left. Nobody had read my work. My sales were not great, and so it looked like I was dead in the water. But then my agent, I wrote another book, and my agent shipped it to Ace after they had refused the third book. Shipped the fourth book to Ace, and Ace boy, I'm going to not give names because I can't remember it close enough, and I don't want to offend anybody. But anyway, they wrote back to my agent, Virginia Kidd, and said, "Why are you sending us this book? We already said we're not interested in Patty's books anymore." And Virginia Kidd was my agent, was very ill, and she had this new up-and-coming agent, Lynn Prentice, who was my agent for many years.
Yep.
And she was very, very forthright and very opinionated. And Virginia told her to write the letter. Right. Okay, Virginia told her to write the letter and explain to them that my contract says, because lawyers write publishing contracts, not publishers who actually know what they're doing, says that if you refuse this book, they still have an option on your next possible book, right?
Right.
Which presupposes that I'm going to write a bad book just so I can change publishing houses. And it's as much work, if not more, to write a bad book, and it's soul destroying to write a bad book. I don't know why any author would ever write a bad book, but that's kind of where the legal language is.
I will say that it has been, it is not unknown. So yeah.
Oh, really? You're kidding me. Okay. All right. Well, you've just destroyed my world.
Sorry.
But at any rate, it was under contract. I had to send it to them. Lynn was very forthright, and she told them right to their face. And then she signed the letter, Virginia Kidd. And Virginia Kidd and that particular editor were good friends. And she took very much offense at having a nasty letter sent to her, supposing it came from Virginia Kid. And in all of the contram that followed, somebody actually read the book.
Hey.
And right, and that was Ann Sowards, who was a new editor there, and she liked it. So they bought the next book. And if Lynn had not done that, you would not be talking to me now. I would not have published anymore. So that is my origin story.
Okay.
That is the long tail.
Any writer can follow.
Yeah, no. You know, I don't think there's any real trap for writers to follow. And it's particularly in the era of new technology. I think that it used to be, you know, back in the 70s and the 80s, there really was a track. It really was a way to get published and to get better and to get well known. And there was a way. And I just think that every day we have some new technology. 10 years ago, Audible was nothing. Audiobooks were nothing. And now they're huge. And self-publishing was, oh boy, self-published authors. And now it's like, there are some wonderful self-published authors out there. So it's all write good books. And if you can't get them published, write more good books, and eventually it will work out.
Yeah. Talking about that, we do have a very specific question about your process, and we'll get to that as we go on. But are you a seat of the pants writer or a plotter? I like in your bio on your webpage, you talk about journeys with imaginary friends. So that kind of leads me to suspect that you are a go with the flow, which I prefer to pantser.
Yeah, thank you. Into the mist. That was the best term I ever heard for it, because really it describes the process much better. I have an idea of where I'm going, and I have an idea of things that I want to put in there from point A to point B. And as I get closer, as I'm writing there, the closer I get to the story, as I write the story, I see more details. And because I don't outline, to me, and I have written books, but I mean, I've written a lot of books, and at this point I've written them any which way. And what I found the most successful for me is to have a pretty good idea of where I'm going. And then let the characters drive the story, and let the plot drive the story. And if it's not going the way I kind of thought it was, go with it and see what happens. And if it starts meandering too much, that's fine. Just get to the end of the book, go through and weave the storylines that need to get woven back through in the edits. My drafts, the drafts I send to Ann Sowards, sometimes are pretty rough, and they have places that are really awful and big chunks that need to be cut. I am the queen of edits. I can make my books come to life in the edits. That's where the funnies happen. That's where the emotions happen. It's after I've written that first draft.
Yeah, I find that if you are a into the mist or go with the flow kind of writer, that you do have to be a very good editor, so that you can make that story tight.
In the end, there's no good way. What it is if you don't get it right, it comes out differently. If you're an into the mist writer and you don't edit it correctly, then you end up with a story that feels meandering, and there's extra scenes that don't matter, and there's characters in there that don't do anything, and that kind of thing. And those can be entertaining to read too, but it does keep it from being that top flight book. And if you are an outline editor, your books can feel or outline writer, your books can feel very mechanical. They can feel very forced, and they can feel very predictable. But good writers can produce great stories either direction.
Yeah. We only have 10 minutes, which is amazing to me. Well done.
Because I'm a novelist. I don't speak slowly. I don't say anything concise.
No, that's good.
That's
good.
So.
Good to know. The specific question was there's a rape scene in one of your novels. Was that really was that hard to write? Was it?
Yes. Well, yes and no. That was in Iron Kiss. That's the third of the Mercy books, and it was one of the things about writing Into the Mist is that I really feel the demand of the story. I have the characters. I know who they are. I know what we're doing. And I get to a point and I know what everybody's going to do. And when I get to that point, sometime in Iron Kiss, I knew what was going to happen. And I had the option of having my main character get out of that really bad situation. But I didn't like what that said. That said that if you're smart enough, if you're strong enough, if you happen to be the protagonist of urban fantasy series, you can get out of a bad situation, which implies that if you get hurt, then if you get assaulted, that there's something wrong with you. And that's not true.
Right.
And I also didn't like the thing it said that if a character is raped, that automatically means they cannot be the protagonist of an urban fantasy series. They can't be a strong person anymore. They can't be, and I didn't like that either.
Who makes those rules? Yes,
I know, but it's the implications. You know, I always think about the implications of what I write, and what I guess growing up when I did, where initially, you know, when I started reading science fiction and fantasy, probably 90% of the books were from a male standpoint, and women existed. That's what I'm called in Q. Women existed to be love interests and to be rescued, and it made me not dislike those books, because that was the era and they were great. Some of them were great stories, and there were people who were not doing that. But it did make me really consider what I'm implying by the books. I also read a lot of Silhouette and Harlequin romances of the era, in which the women had to be under 20. I think they could possibly be 21. And the men had to be between 35 and 45. And the men were powerful, successful men, and the women, if they had jobs, they were minor jobs. And the power dynamic between those two was awful. It was awful. And when I ate them up when I was 15, 16, 17, that kind of thing. It wasn't until I was in college, and I picked one up, and it was an old favorite, and I read it, and then the very end scene, she's apologizing to him because she's immature. And since I was now older than the main character in the book, I was able to go, of course you are. You're a baby. What? And that taught me to really pay attention to, that and Lorraine Gilman too. She was very good at that, at implications of the decisions you make as a writer.
Yeah,
so,
I have to say, as a reader, the implications of what your characters do and following those out is just a joy to read. Just so much fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So by the time I wrote that scene in Iron Kissed, I talked it over with my editor. I talked it over with my husband, and I said, you know, there's going to be an outcry, because up until that point, urban fantasy was not bubblegum by any means. That's not true. But it really had not faced a lot of really major issues. And actually, that year, I was not the only one to face tough things and to deal with tough issues. But before that, it had been kind of a safe place for people who wanted a safe read about werewolves and vampires. So, I am probably most proud of that book and the way it worked out, because I've had so many victims write to me and thank me for the way I handled it. And everybody handles an assault like that differently, but it's breaking your feeling of having lived in a safe world. We all know we don't live in a safe world. We don't. The only thing you know about living is that you're going to die. That's for sure. But we can live in it because there's part of our brain that says, oh, everything's safe and we're all right. And when you're assaulted, especially unexpectedly, and rape is a terrible one, but there are other kinds of assaults that will do the same thing. And your safe zone is broken, and it breaks the people around you, and it changes the way the people you know look at you, and it's a hard thing to deal with. And I just thought, well, that's what the story calls for. I have to do it. So the scene itself, I sat down and wrote the whole, maybe the whole end of the book in about 2 sessions. Wow. From the rape scene to the next to the last scene in the book. And the last scene in the book I played with a lot, because I wanted to give my books, I want people who pick up my books to put down the book and be in a little better place than they were when they picked it up. And that one was hard to do that with. Yeah. And so I picked a scene, and then I took the same scene, and the next book I started with that scene, because if it had actually ended the way that scene would have ended if it had been a different time and place with different people, it had to stop in order not to be an abusive situation. So that's why the first scene in Bone Crossed is the last scene in Iron Kissed. I have never actually read the rape scene over again. I never read that. I read my other books to make sure, I read them to make sure that I haven't left little bits of story that I wanted to pull in, and that I haven't promised readers that I was going to talk about something, and make sure that those get in. But Iron Kissed, I stop when he gives her the cup. I stop there, and then I will pick it up again. She's not usually. I have read the scene with Adam and Ben before, but mostly I just pick it up again on the very last scene of the book because I can't read it because it was traumatic for me too.
Yeah, Redliners by Dave Drake is like that for me. It's a brilliant book. It is about dealing with traumatic stress, and I read it once, and that's all I need to do. But it's also a very therapeutic book for a lot of people. So
yes,
it's
and he's a
good
fantastic
that
writer.
it is good that writers take these things on. Readers appreciate it. Let's see. Mercy Thompson. She's I got to ask you. So I'm going to ask you a tough question. Do you
Sure.
have favorites of your characters? People that you enjoy spending more time with than others?
Yeah. I love Charles. Charles is fun because he's the kind of character I love to write, where the people in the book see an entirely different person than the readers and I see, and insight. So it's a shared. I used to say shared joke, but it's not really a shared joke. It's a shared understanding between the readers and I and Charles that the rest of the people don't get. And it makes for wonderful scenes. It's really a fun thing to do. And so Charles has a really awful sense of humor. And it's really dry, and it's really and it leaves people going, that sounded like it might be funny. And they look at him and go, no, you're too scary to be funny. And so those kinds of scenes are really fun. I love a seal. A seal is, and I'll admit this now, a seal is based on my favorite horse, who is, we call him the evil genius. And he's really smart, and he's very cat-like, and he thinks very well of himself. And he's right. He is beautiful. He is that smart. He is that talented. And that's
got to be an Arabian horse. Yeah.
It is, of course. Yes. Yeah. They're very, well, that's my favorite thing about the Arabians is they're the cats of the horse world. I love anything with four hoofs and whinnies. I love them. But the Arabs are the one that speak to my soul. They're smarter than I am, most of them. And they're incredibly generous, and they will do anything you ask of them. And if you try to tell them to do something, they will plant all 4 feet and say no. And if you keep pushing, they'll say hell no. And I like that. I like that in my friends. So so that's a seal. He's and then I of course you build characters from lots of different things. There's that. And then he's also kind of do you remember Camelot, Lancelot at Camelot, when he sings the song C'est Moi? And you go, yeah, actually he's not conceited. He's just truthful. He is that good. He is that wonderful. But if I sang this song C'est Moi and I meant it about me, my mother would have smacked me. That's not your right, but he's that right. And so that's a seal too. He was just, and he's such a fun character to put up against other characters. He builds tension in this scene because he's crazy. Well, he's going crazy, and he's incredibly dangerous. And he's just a fun character to work with. But really, usually I just like whatever characters I'm dealing with in the scene. And if I don't think they're interesting enough, then I pep them up and I figure out how to make them interesting. This last book, Wild Sign, I took on Leah, who is Bran's wife. And I've had so many people over the years tell me what a terrible person Leah was. And I'm going, no. If you knew the story,
she got stuck in a shitty situation.
Right, exactly. Everybody was. And Bran and Leah had managed to come to a place in which they could survive. And neither one of them wanted to poke it. And that's why their relationship was so awful, is because this worked. And both of them were afraid if they moved anything, it would break.
Yeah. All right,
And that was,
we
sorry,
have reached time, so we've been given the high sign for time. I know. You have a new book coming out March 2022
I do,
from
Soul
Ace.
Taken.
Oh, there we go. Yay. Thank
It
you,
is up.
Hillbilly. Well done.
Awesome.
Yes. Okay. Beautiful covers by Dan Dos Santos.
He's
And
amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
Both as a
yeah.
human being, but as a cover artist, he's the best. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that a Mercy Thompson book?
It is. Yes. I do 2 Mercy Thompson books and then Alpha and Omega. So the last book was an Alpha and Omega, so I'll do 2 Mercy and then another Alpha and Omega.
Okay, great. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Alpha and Omega graphic novels, but they're out there. People should check them out. And yeah, well, they're not doing this to me, so I think we can still talk.
Okay. Okay. I'll bring up that. Let's see. What do I want to say? I want to say that people ask me all the time about movies or film or whatever, and I will say that right now we're kind of closer than we've been in a long time.
Okay.
The Mercy books have been under contract a couple of times, and we're kind of working towards that again. As soon as I have solid contracts and as soon as I have word from the people I'm dealing with, then I will let people know. So that's a possibility that's out there too. And I'm really stoked about the team they put together and about the way I think that they're going to do it right. I think they're going to have a Native American play Mercy, which they need to. And I'm super stoked, but it's Hollyweird. Don't count on anything until I tell you they're filming. But so that was a neat, cool thing.
In the meantime, you can do your Dreamcast over at Patty's page. She has a discussion. She has a discussion chat thing over there, so you can talk amongst yourselves about how you would cast it if you were making the movie, right?
Right, and periodically it comes up on the Facebook pages. Somebody will start it, and then people start posting it, and it's really fun to look at. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right. They're still not giving me the high side. All right. What